Then later on, in the same vein, I'm going to be quoting a little bit from Jung, psychological types, in connection with the interpretation that I was offering. And so Jung is discussing an author named Spitaler who gave an account of the myth of Prometheus um, and Pandora, which isn't that important, but some context. Quote, Spitaler's Prometheus, like his god, turns away from the world, from the periphery, and gazes inward to the center, the narrow passage of rebirth. This concentration or introversion pipes libido into the unconscious. The activity of the unconscious is increased. The psyche begins to work and creates a product that wants to get out of the unconscious into consciousness. But consciousness has two attitudes. The Promethean, which withdraws the libido from the world, introverting without giving out, and the Epimethean, constantly giving out and responding in a soulless fashion, fascinated by the claims of external objects. When Pandora makes her gift to the world, it means psychologically that an unconscious product of great value is on the point of reaching the extroverted consciousness, i.e., it's seeking a relation to the real world. Although the Promethean side, or in human terms, the artist, intuitively apprehends the great value of the product, his personal relations to the world are so subordinated to the tyranny of tradition that it is appreciated merely as a work of art and not taken for what it actually is, a symbol that promises a renewal of life. In order to transform it from a purely aesthetic interest into a living reality, it must be assimilated into life and actually lived. But when a man's attitude is mainly introverted and given to abstraction, the function of extroversion is inferior in the grip of collective restraints. These restraints prevent the symbol created by the psyche from living. The jewel gets lost, but one cannot really live if God, the supreme vital value that is expressed in the symbol, cannot become a living fact. Hence, the loss of the jewel signifies at the same time the beginning of Epimetheus' downfall. And now the enantiodromia begins. Instead of taking for granted, as every rationalist and optimist is inclined to do, that a good state will be followed by a better, because everything tends towards an ascending development, Epimetheus, the man of blameless conscience and universally acknowledged moral principles, makes a pact with Behemoth and his evil host, and even the divine children entrusted to his care are bartered to the devil. Psychologically, this means that the collective, undifferentiated attitude to the world stifles a man's highest values and becomes a destructive force whose influence increases until the Promethean side, the ideal and abstract attitude, places itself at the service of the soul's jewel and, like a true Prometheus, kindles for the world a new fire. Spitaler's Prometheus has to come out of his solitude and tell men, even at the risk of his life, that they are in error, and where they err, he must acknowledge the pitilessness of truth, just as Goethe's Prometheus has to experience in Phileros, the pitilessness of love. Skipping forward a little, just to page 187. That was from, if I didn't say so, that was from page 183 in psychological types. This is now 187. But the attempt at a regressive renaissance shared the fate of the Prometheus fragment and Pandora. It was stillborn. The classical solution would no longer work because the intervening centuries of Christianity, with their profound spiritual upheavals, could not be undone. So the penchant for the antique gradually petered out in medievalism. This process sets in with Goethe's Faust, where the problem is seized by both horns. The divine wager between good and evil is accepted. Faust, the medieval Prometheus, enters the lists with Mephistopheles, the medieval Epimetheus, and makes a pact with him. And here the problem becomes so sharply focused that one can see that Faust and Mephisto are the same person. The Epimethean principle, which always thinks backwards and reduces everything to the primal chaos of interfluent forms, condenses into the devil, whose evil power threatens everything living with the devil's cold fist, and would force back the light into the maternal darkness whence it was born. The devil everywhere displays a true Epimethean thinking, a thinking in terms of nothing but, which reduces all to nothing. Next paragraph. The Promethean defiance of the accepted gods is personified in the figure of the medieval magician. The magician has preserved in himself a trace of primitive paganism. He possesses a nature that is still unaffected by the Christian dichotomy and is in touch with the still pagan unconscious, where the opposites lie side by side in their original naive state, beyond the reach of sinfulness, but liable, if assimilated into conscious life, to beget evil as well as good with the same demonic energy, part of that power which would ever work evil yet engenders good. He is a destroyer but also a savior, and such a figure is preeminently suited to become the symbolic bearer of an attempt to resolve the conflict. Moreover, the medieval magician has laid aside the classical naivete, which was no longer possible, and become thoroughly steeped in the Christian atmosphere. The old pagan element must at first drive him into a complete Christian denial and mortification of self. The old pagan element must at first drive him into a complete Christian denial and mortification of self, because his longing for redemption is so strong that every avenue has to be explored. But in the end, the Christian attempt at a solution fails too. And it then transpires that the possibility of redemption lies precisely in the obstinate persistence of the old pagan element, because the anti-Christian symbol opens the way for an acceptance of evil. Goethe's intuition thus grasped the problem in all its acuteness. It's certainly significant that the more superficial attempts at a solution, the Prometheus fragment, Pandora, and the Rosicrucian compromise, a blend of Dionysian joyousness and Christian self-sacrifice, remain uncompleted. Faust's redemption begins at his death. The divine Promethean character he had preserved all his life fell away from him only at death, with his rebirth. Psychologically, this means that the Faustian attitude must be abandoned before the individual can become an integrated whole. The figure that first appeared as Gretchen and then on a high level as Helen and was finally exalted as the Mater Gloriosa is a symbol whose many meanings cannot be discussed here. Suffice to say that it is the same primordial image that lies at the heart of Gnosticism, the image of the divine harlot, Eve, Helen, Mary, Sophia, Achamoth. A few more things to say that are maybe slightly more relevant, actually. The significance of the uniting symbol, this is page 189. If, from the vantage point we have now gained, we glance once more at Spitler's presentation of the problem, we're immediately struck by the fact that the pact with evil came about by no design of Prometheus, but because of the thoughtlessness of Epimetheus. who possesses a merely collective conscience, but has no power of discrimination with regard to the things of the inner world. As is invariably the case with a standpoint oriented to the object, it allows itself to be determined exclusively by collective values, and consequently overlooks what is new and unique. Current collective values can certainly be measured by an objective criterion, but only a free and individual assessment, a matter of living feeling, can give the true measure of something newly created. It also needs a man who has a soul, and not merely relations to objects. The downfall of Epimetheus begins with the loss of the newborn God image. His morally unassailable thinking, feeling, and acting in no way prevent the evil and destructive element from creeping in and gaining the upper hand. The invasion of evil signifies that something previously good has turned into something harmful. Spidler is here expressing the idea that the ruling moral principle, although excellent to begin with, in time loses its essential connection with life, since it no longer embraces life's variety and abundance. What is rationally correct is too narrow a concept to grasp life in its totality and give it permanent expression. The divine birth is an event altogether outside the bounds of rationality. Psychologically, it proclaims the fact that a new symbol, a new expression of life at its most intense, is being created. Every Epimethean man and everything Epimethean in man prove incapable of comprehending this event. Yet from that moment, the highest intensity of life is to be found only in this new direction. Every other direction gradually drops away, dissolved in oblivion. The new life-giving symbol springs from Prometheus' love for his soul mistress, a demonic figure indeed. One can therefore be certain that, interwoven with the new symbol and its living beauty, there will also be the element of evil, for otherwise it would lack the glow of life as well as beauty, since life and beauty are by nature morally neutral. That is why the Epimethean collective mentality finds nothing estimable in it. It's completely blinded by its one-sided moral standpoint, which is identical with the little lamb. The raging of Epimetheus when he turns against the little lamb is merely écraser l'enfant, French, I think, in new form, a revolt against established Christianity, which was incapable of understanding the new symbol and so giving life a new direction. Which was incapable of understanding the new symbol and so giving life a new direction. This bare statement of the case might leave us entirely cold were there no poets who could fathom and read the collective unconscious. They are always the first to divine the darkly moving mysterious currents and to express them as best they can in symbols that speak to us. They make known, like true prophets, the stirrings of the collective unconscious, or in the language of the Old Testament, the will of God, which in the course of time must inevitably come to the surface as a collective phenomenon. Just moving on a little. Mm. So it then goes into the sort of distinction between a, a differentiated psychic function, which is sort of conscious and multiplicitous, and at the propositional level on the previous argument, and the alternative, which is sort of more undifferentiated psychic function, which is more unconscious and more unified, which corresponds with the perspectival level that we were discussing earlier. Naturally, this split is a hindrance not only in society but also in the individual. As a result, the vital optimum withdraws more and more from the opposing extremes and seeks a middle way, which must naturally be irrational and unconscious, according to Jung, just because the opposite's irrational and conscious. That complicates it, but just to say, since the middle position as a function of mediation between the opposites possesses an irrational character and is still unconscious, it appears projected in the form of a mediated God, the Messiah. In our more primitive Western forms of religion, primitive because lacking insight, the new bearer of life appears as a God or savior who, in his fatherly love and solicitude, or from his own inner resolve, puts an end to the division as and when it suits him and for reasons we're not fitted to understand. The childishness of this conception needs no stressing. The East has for thousands of years been familiar with this process and has founded on it psychological doctrine of salvation, which brings the way of deliverance within man's canon capacity. Within man's canon capacity, meaning human, meaning us. Thus, the religions of India and China, and particularly Buddhism, which combines the spheres of both, possess the idea of a redemptive middle way of magical efficacy, which is attainable by means of a conscious attitude. The Vedic conception is a conscious attempt to find release from the pairs of opposites in order to reach the path of redemption. And then that allows us to access the Upanishads and the Vedas, which is really what I wanted to quote from the whole time. Yeah. So there's a few that I want to quote. Braham is Sat and Asat, being and non-being, Satyam and Asatyam, reality and irreality. There are two forms of Brahman, the formed and the formless, the mortal and the immortal, the stationary and the moving, the actual and the transcendental. That person, the maker of all things, the great self, seated forever in the heart of man, is perceived by the heart, by the thought, by the mind, they who know that become immortal. When there is no darkness of ignorance, there is neither day nor night, neither being nor non-being. In the imperishable, infinite, highest Brahman, two things are hidden, knowing and not knowing. Not knowing perishes, knowing is immortal. But he who controls both knowing and not knowing is another. That self, smaller than small, greater than great, is hidden in the heart of this creature here. Man becomes free from desire and free from sorrow when by the grace of the Creator he beholds the glory of the self. Sitting still he walks afar, lying down he goes everywhere. Who but I can know the God who rejoices and rejoices not? Just as a falcon or an eagle, after flying to and fro in space, wearies and folds its wings and drops down to its eyrie, so this person, Purusha, hastens to that state where, asleep, he desires no desires and sees no dreams. This, verily, is that form of his which is beyond desire, free from evil, without fear, as a man in the embrace of a beloved woman knows nothing of a without and a within. So this person, in the embrace of the knowing self, knows nothing of a without and a within. This verily is that form of his in which all desire is satisfied, self his sole desire, which is no desire without sorrow. An ocean of seeing, one without a second, he becomes whose world is Brahman. This is man's highest achievement. This is man's highest achievement, his greatest wealth, his final goal, his utmost joy. There's a few more that are applicable. So this is from page 199, the Brahmanic conception of the uniting symbol. When it is said that Brahman was first born in the east, it means that each day Brahman is born in the east like yonder sun. Yonder man in the sun is Parameshtan, Brahman, Atman. Brahman is a light like the sun. As to that Brahman, it is yonder burning disk. First was Brahman born in the east. From the horizon, the gracious one appears in splendor. He illumines the forms of this world, the deepest, the highest. He is the cradle of what is and is not. Father of the luminaries, begetter of the treasure, he entered many-formed into the spaces of the air. They glorify him with hymns of praise, making the youth that is Brahman increase by Brahman. Brahman brought forth the gods, Brahman created the world. And Jung, in this last passage, I've italicized certain characteristic points which make it clear that Brahman is not only the producer, but the produced, the ever-becoming. The epithet gracious one, here bestowed on the sun, is elsewhere applied to the seer who is endowed with the divine light. For like the Brahman sun, the mind of the seer traverses earth and heaven, contemplating Brahman. The intimate connection, indeed identity, between the divine being and the self, Atman, of man, is generally known. Generally, I give an example from the Atharva Veda. Quote, the disciple of Brahman gives life to both worlds. In him, all the gods are of one mind. He contains and sustains earth and heaven. His tapas is food even for his teacher. To the disciple of Brahman there come to visit him fathers and gods, singly and in multitudes, and he nourishes all the gods with his tapas. The disciple of Brahman is himself an incarnation of Brahman, whence it follows that the essence of Brahman is identical with a definite psychological state. Brahman is also prana, the breath of life, and the cosmic principle. It is vayu, wind, which is described in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad as the thread by which this world and the other world and all things are tied together, the self, the inner controller, the immortal. He who dwells in man, he who dwells in the sun, are the same. It's to the same theme. Prayer of the dying. The face of the real is covered with a golden disk. Open it, O sun, that we may see the nature of the real. Spread thy rays and gather them in. The light, which is thy fairest form, I see it. That person who dwells yonder in the sun is myself. May my breath go to the immortal wind when my body is consumed to ash. And this light which shines above this heaven, higher than all, on top of everything, in the highest world, beyond which there are no other worlds, this same is the light which is in man. And of this we have tangible proof when we perceive by touch the heat here in the body. As a grain of rice or a grain of barley or a grain of millet or the kernel of a grain of millet is this golden person in the heart, like a flame without smoke, greater than the earth, greater than the sky, greater than space, greater than all the worlds, greater than all these worlds. That is the soul of all creatures. That is myself. Into that I shall enter on departing hence. Brahman is conceived in the Atharva Veda as the vitalistic principle, the life force, which fashions all the organs and their respective instincts. Quote, who planted the seed within him that he might spin the thread of generation? Who assembled within him the powers of the mind, gave him voice and the play of features? Even man's strength comes from Brahman, this is Jung. It's clear from these examples, which could be multiplied indefinitely, that the Brahman concept, by virtue of all its attributes and symbols, coincides with that of a dynamic or creative principle, which I've termed libido. The word Brahman means prayer, incantation, sacred speech, sacred knowledge, holy life, the sacred caste, the Brahmins, the absolute. Their sense stresses the prayer connotation as being especially characteristic. The word derives from bar, to swell, whence prayer is conceived as the upward striving will of man towards the holy, the divine. This derivation indicates a particular psychological state, a specific concentration of libido, which through overflowing innovations produces a general state of tension associated with the feeling of swelling. Hence, in common speech, one frequently uses images like overflowing with emotion, unable to restrain oneself, bursting when referring to such a state. What filleth the heart goeth out by the mouth. And 202, the idea of a creative world principle is a projected perception of the living essence in man himself. The idea of a creative world principle is a projected perception of the living essence in man himself. And just a quote from page 51 of the same text, Psychological Types. And yet, even if his mind could, man cannot remain thus divided, for the split is not a mere matter of some offbeat philosophy, but the daily repeated problem of his relation to himself and to the world. And because this is basically the problem at issue, the division cannot be resolved by a discussion of the nominalist and realist arguments. For its solution, a third mediating standpoint is needed. Esse in intellectu lacks tangible reality. Esse in re lacks mind. Idea and thing come together, however, in the human psyche, which holds the balance between them. What would the idea amount to if the psyche did not provide its living value? What would the thing be worth if the psyche withheld from it the determining force of the sense impression? What indeed is reality if it is not a reality in ourselves, an esse in anima? Living reality is the produce neither of the actual objective behavior of things, nor of the formulated idea exclusively, but rather of the combination of both in the living psychological process through esse and anima. Only through the specific vital activity of the psyche does the sense impression attain that intensity, and the idea that effective force, which are the two indispensable constituents of living reality. Okay. Hmm. Tao is the creative process, begetting as the father and bringing forth as the mother. It is the beginning and end of all creatures. He whose actions are in harmony with Tao becomes one with Tao. Therefore, the perfected sage liberates himself from the opposites having seen through their connection with one another and their alternation. Therefore, it is said, when your work is done, then withdraw, such is heaven's way. He, the perfected sage, cannot either be drawn into friendship or repelled, cannot be benefited, cannot be harmed, cannot be either raised or humbled. Being one with Tao resembles a state of infancy. Can you keep the unquiet physical soul from straying, hold fast to the unity, and never quit it? Can you, when concentrating your breath, make it soft like that of a little child? He who knows the male yet cleaves to what is female becomes like a ravine, receiving all things under heaven. And being such a ravine, he knows all the time a power that he never calls upon in vain. This is returning to the state of infancy. The impunity of that which is fraught with this power may be likened to that of an infant. In Jung, this psychological attitude is, as we know, an essential condition for obtaining the kingdom of heaven, and this, in its turn, all rational interpretations notwithstanding, is the central irrational symbol whence the redeeming effect comes. The Christian symbol merely has a more social character than the related conceptions of the East. These are directly connected with age-old dynamistic ideas of a magical power emanating from people and things, or at a high level of development, from gods or a divine principle. That will do.